here with Dan Wells. Dan is a DM of the TypeCast RPG Gaming Show and author of science fiction and horror novels, including the John Cleaver Series and the Partial Series. He's here to discuss storytelling techniques for RPG gaming. So I'll turn it over to him, and after he's wrapped up his presentation, we'll leave some time for a few questions. All over to you, Dan.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. How are you? There's two of you. Feel free to unmute yourselves if you want to. This is being recorded for later on, so it is not purely just me, talking into the void. But thank you, the two of you that are here live to see this. My name is Dan Wells, and as introduced, I am a professional game master and a professional author. I have been writing books forever. I told my parents in second grade that I was going to be an author, and they kind of smiled and nodded and said, okay, that's great. What are you going to do until that pays off? And that started paying off about 12 years ago with my very first book, I Am Not a Serial Killer. And many of you, especially if you read young adult, are more likely to know me from the Partial Series, which is YA, and that was the New York Times bestseller. I became a professional game master last year. I've always been a gamer, and it's always been something that I love to do. And I have a friend who is a professional game master, and I met her at a local conference a few years ago, and I was fascinated by this because here I've been playing games for free like a chump forever. That's not entirely. I love playing games for free with my friends, but I thought this is such a cool idea. And one of the things that every professional author knows is that you need to always be looking for other ways to pay the bills. And so last year, when March hit and everyone went into quarantine, that's when I thought, well, this is the perfect time. I should also say I have a cold right now, so my voice is not usually this gravelly and authoritative. I apologize for that. If I have to blow my nose partway through this presentation, I apologize in advance. Anyway, last year, the quarantine felt like the perfect opportunity to try professional GMing because everyone was stuck at home. Nobody was supposed to go out in public. Everyone who had a regular game group had to kind of stop it. People who didn't have game groups suddenly didn't have social circles at all because everyone was trapped or supposed to be trapped in their homes. And so that felt like a really good opportunity to try this. And it's worked out really well. So I've been doing this Dungeon Master for hire for about a year and a half. Prior to that, I have been running a Twitch show called TypeCast RPG that is a D&D campaign that I run with some of my friends, all of them authors as well. We thought it would be a fun gimmick to have a bunch of professional authors play D&D, and that's proven to be pretty good. We were very concerned for a long time that we couldn't get our viewership up past 40 or 50 people per episode. And then we learned that makes us one of the most successful D&D campaigns on Twitch. There's the humongous ones that get thousands or tens of thousands of listeners, and there's like 6 of those. And then there's hundreds of them that get 4 or 5 viewers, and then we're sitting pretty good at like 40 or 50. So I guess the number one thing to tell you is don't get into Twitch streaming for D&D expecting it to be lucrative. But you don't want to hear about the money side. Well, maybe some of you do. And if you do, we'll have questions later. You want to hear about storytelling because that's what this is supposed to be called. Storytelling in role-playing games. So now that you've got my bona fides and my resume out of the way, I've been running the Twitch show for 2.5 years, pro DM for 1.5 years, playing games with my friends since, 6th grade. Now let's talk about storytelling. One of the things that I love about role-playing games, and they are without question my very favorite hobby, is the opportunity to tell stories and to tell interactive stories specifically. I'm a storyteller by trade. I have 19 books in print, and you should look me up on Amazon and read them all and buy them all. But let's talk about role-playing games. I love telling stories myself, but I especially love the interactive aspect of role-playing games because it allows you to tell a story without knowing where it's going to go or how it is going to get there. And the fact that the players and the game master are kind of working together to tell the best story they can makes it so interesting, and it really makes it come alive. And there's so many new ideas and things that you never expected, new directions for the story to take that you hadn't seen coming. And sometimes that can be frustrating because you have a wonderful plan and then the players don't follow it. And sometimes it can be beautiful because you had a wonderful plan and the players come up with something better. So first point that I want to make, because this is a library thing, and I know that at some point, maybe some of you here are parents or somebody else, some parent is going to be like, well, let's watch this video because my son keeps asking about Dungeons and Dragons and I want to know what the library has to say about it. Here's what I have to say about it. If more parents really knew what role-playing games were about, what they were and how they worked, they would push their kids into them. I grew up in the 80s in the middle of all these crazy scares when people were terrified. You know, Tom Hanks made a movie about how D&D was evil and sucked people into the occult. That is all absolute nonsense. What D&D really is, every role-playing game, and there are hundreds, if not thousands of them, it's communal storytelling where you and your friends solve problems together using math and reading. It is about communication. It is about improvisation. It is about confronting problems and finding unique and unexpected solutions to them. It encourages reading skills. It encourages writing skills. Most of them use math, not advanced math. You're not going to do like Pythagorean theorems to figure out who hits the orc with your sword. But there is enough math in there that my 9-year-old is getting pretty good at basic arithmetic the more that we play role-playing games together. So role-playing games are phenomenal because of the way that they encourage this kind of interactive storytelling and problem solving. One person takes the role of a game master and the rest of the players are all there, you know, and they will take on a character. So it's kind of like acting. And so the game master will say, well, you are walking down the street and then the thing happens. And then the players say, well, that they'll ask questions to learn more about the situation, or they'll, you know, proffer solutions. Well, what if I do this? How does that change things? Or let me talk to the person. One issue that I run into a lot, because several of the games that I run professionally are for kids, it can be very difficult at first for some kids to talk to people, even in a game situation. And this, honestly, this isn't just for kids. My wife is exactly the same way. The few times I've convinced her to try role-playing with me, you know, we'll get into a conversation and I'll say, okay, what do you say to the shopkeeper? And she's like, I don't know. It can be very difficult for people to know what to say. And role-playing games is a way to work through those kind of communication hesitancies as well and get over certain aspects of social anxiety. It's important to remember as well that everyone is on the same team. It's not the game master is trying to kill off the player characters, and it's not the characters trying to beat the story and beat the game master. Everyone is working together to tell a good story. And at the end of the day, that's the number one takeaway that I want everyone to have from this talk, is that you are working together. And what that means is that there needs to be a lot of communication. If you want to tell good stories with role-playing games, then you have to go into it with an expectation of change, and you have to be flexible. Think about your favorite stories, whether this is from a book or from a movie or a fairy tale or whatever. one of the hallmarks of a good story, in fact, the foundation, in my opinion, of good storytelling is conflict. Something bad is going on. But story conflict comes in two types. Let's take a look at Star Wars as a great example. And I am old enough that when I say Star Wars, I mean Episode 4, A New Hope. Okay, that was the first movie that used to be called Star Wars before it turned into a whole thing. And so the story of that one, there is a conflict going on. We need to rescue the princess, and we need to stop the bad guys from hurting her. And that is what we call the plot conflict. That is not going to be solved until Darth Vader, the antagonist, is defeated and the Death Star, which is the main threat, is destroyed. Not until the Death Star is destroyed can we truly say that Princess Leia is safe. Sorry for all these spoilers for this 44-year-old movie. I apologize. So that is the plot conflict. And it's very easy for us to think in a role-playing terms, well, okay, I know what to do. We have all our characters. You know, someone's playing Luke and someone's playing Han and someone's playing Chewie and so on and so on. And they have all of these plot obstacles that they need to overcome. They need to escape from Tatooine. They need to hide from the stormtroopers when their ship gets captured. They need to sneak around in the Death Star. They need to escape from the Death Star. They need to do this big space fighter combat scene. There's a lot of really fun adventure plot conflict kind of stuff. But that's not why people love Star Wars. Their second type of conflict going on is what I call the emotional conflict. And this is where we get into the idea of a character arc. Because the story is not just about Luke Skywalker rescuing the princess and blowing up a thing. The story is about Luke Skywalker growing up, becoming wiser, becoming smarter, more powerful, more capable, and learning an important lesson about himself. And this lesson is expressed to him early on. He is a young kid. He lives on a farm. He knows very little about the world or about how it works. And he has a mentor character who tells him, well, you need to learn about the Force. You need to learn how to trust in something larger than yourself. You need to become wiser. And that is, in the end, how he is able to eventually defeat the Death Star, right? Once again, we're getting into spoiler territory for the most popular movie of all time. He has the little targeting computer and he turns it off. And he says, no, I'm going to use the Force and trust in the Force. And that is a huge moment of growth for him. That is kind of the completion of his character arc, where he stops trusting purely in his own strength, in the technology that he has, and he learns to rely on this bigger, more powerful thing. And so it's this big moment of growth for him. And as soon as he does that, well, then he's able to blow up the Death Star and defeat Darth Vader and save the princess, and everything all comes together and it's wonderful. So what does this mean for role-playing games? Well, it's very easy for the game master to come up with a bunch of challenges. You need to have this big evil castle, and you need to rescue a person from it, and you need to defeat these bad guys, and you need to do all of this stuff. But you can also take the time to build those emotional conflicts into your storytelling as well. Talk to the players in advance and say, okay, you're playing a character. Tell me about your character. And they'll say, oh, well, I want this person to be, what would Luke be in Dungeons and Dragons terms? A paladin, a magical warrior? It's like, okay, well, he's going to be this kind of character. And he starts off, not knowing much, but he's got this cool magic sword, and he knows how to fly a space fighter, and he's a pretty good pilot. And that's what he does. And then the game master says, well, that's cool. What do you want him to learn? What do you as a player want to do? Do you want to grow in a certain way? Do you want to have a certain experience? Do you want to, how do you want your character to change over the course of the game? And some people are going to be very excited about telling a Luke Skywalker kind of story, right? Where they get to grow and learn a valuable lesson and overcome something. there are a lot of players that are going to want a very different kind of story. Anakin Skywalker, for example. I am playing a magical warrior, but I think it would be fun to show a fall from grace, someone who has a lot of power and then screws it up. And whether they want that to end in a tragedy, or they want to fall and then do a redemption arc, or maybe they just want to start off with the redemption arc. My character used to be a wonderful person, but has committed some crimes or has done some bad stuff. And I'd kind of love to show, do a story about how my character is redeeming him or herself, coming back from the depths of despair or tragedy or wherever they start. And so there's a lot of different ways that a character can change, but communication is what is going to make that character change actually work. If the player goes into it with this huge backstory that they've written about, how they used to be a paladin, but then they committed some horrible heresies and now they are trying to be a good person again. If you don't tell that to the game master, or you don't work with the game master in order to bring it out, then you're probably not going to be able to complete that story in a satisfying way. Same thing from the game master's side. If you come up with your own story that you think is super cool, but you don't ask the players what they want, what do they want to do? What do they want to get out of it? What kinds of things do they want to accomplish over the course of the story? Well, then you're not going to be able to give them the kind of story that they're looking for. It'll just be your story that they're kind of participating in and hoping that they can make a mark on it. If you communicate with each other effectively beforehand and during, then all of this becomes easier. One thing that I like to do is in the beginning of a role-playing, story, if it's just one session or if we're going to do a long campaign over multiple weeks or months, start by asking people where they are and where they'd like to go. What kind of change would you like your character to see? And then every couple of months or so, check in with them and say, hey, your character has done this thing. Would you like to, do that? One thing that I had happen recently is some characters met, the players met a side character that was kind of guiding them through a thing. They had to travel from their own kingdom into a neighboring kingdom, and they had to go in disguise so that nobody attacked them because the two kingdoms were at war. And they had a local who was kind of sympathetic to them, who guided them through everything. And I asked, the players afterwards, how is this going? Are you enjoying this? Is there something specific you'd like your character to be able to do? And one of them said, I think it would be really great if we told a romance between my character and this guide. And that had not occurred to me, but I thought it sounded like a great idea. And so we've started to build that into the story, where she, with her character, is kind of slowly, forming a relationship with this enemy from the other kingdom. And they are, whereas they started off as kind of grudging allies, that relationship is turning into something bigger and deeper. And that's one of the reasons that I love interactive storytelling, because that I had not planned that and I had not seen that, but there was something about that storyline that was important to her and that she thought could be cool. And it has been very cool to play through that. So communicating with your players, or if you're the player communicating with the, excuse me. There's that cold rearing its ugly head. Communicating is what is helping, excuse me. It is I can't even breathe or talk. Hang on one second. I'm going to mute and cough more. I hope that works. We'll try this. Anyway, communication, hooray. So that is the first big key. You're on the same team. You're not trying to beat each other. You're trying to tell a good story together. And that requires you to communicate, to work together and to make plans. And sometimes those plans can begin at the very beginning of the story. Sometimes, like with this romance, they will pop up in the middle of it and someone will get a great idea and say, hey, what if we do this? But regardless of when or how it starts, you can work with each other to tell those kinds of cool, exciting stories. And sometimes when you talk to your players and ask them what they're looking for, what they give is less about character arc and more about just kind of what I call the hero fantasy. We all play role-playing games in part because we want to be able to do something that we can't do in real life. I remember when I was describing Super Mario Brothers to someone when I was a kid, like there's a lot of hero fantasy in it because, you know, depending on the power-ups that Mario gets, he can shoot fireballs, or he can fly, or he can become invincible and all these other things. Anyone can jump up and down on a turtle, but not everyone can do all this other exciting stuff. And so when we play role-playing games, we want to be the great warrior, or we want to be a really sneaky thief, or we want to be, you know, the silver-tongued con artist who can talk their way in or out of anything. And maybe we want to be this big, brutal tank warrior who can take all the hits and protect all our people, all of our friends and our allies. And so figuring out what the player's fantasy is, why did you pick the character that you want, and what are you looking for, is another good way of helping to tell those good stories and provide the right kinds of moments. If someone is playing a rogue, are they a rogue because they want to be a thief, because they want to be an assassin, because they want to just be, you know, there's a character in a movie that they thought was really cool and they're trying to emulate that? Figuring out, you know, if somebody wants to be a thief and you as the game master never give them an opportunity to break in somewhere and steal something, well, then they don't get to fulfill that fantasy, that hero fantasy that attracted them to that character. And so, like I said, sometimes when you ask the players what they're looking for, it will be a character arc. I want this person to be redeemed. I want this person to grow. I want this person to, you know, become the king or marry the prince or whatever. And sometimes it will be those hero fantasies. I really want to, you know, I would love to go to a great big ball and infiltrate it in disguise and, you know, talk my way through and you know, charm everybody there. Those kind of big fun set pieces or accomplishments. And so once you know what they're looking for, then it's easier for you as the game master to plan them in there. So we are about at halfway. We're not quite at halfway. And I know there's not very many of you here watching this live. I hope there will be many more later on. But I would love to answer questions. I want to know what you would like to hear about. So if any of you who are watching would like to unmute and ask me a question, go for it. And I'm just going to do my little dance here while I wait. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you think about your questions. And if you have a question, there is a way on Zoom that you can raise your hand. So please do that, raise your hand, or just wait patiently. I'm going to talk about something else for a little bit, and then I'm going to say, all right, question time, and you'll have had plenty of time to think of your question, okay? So what I want to talk about next are other role-playing games, because I've been talking a lot about D&D, but there's a lot of other ones. Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is the best-selling role-playing game of all time. It is not inaccurate to say that it outsells virtually everything else on the market combined. Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is enormous, and it's a very good game, but different game systems kind of encourage different styles of play. And so I want to recommend a couple of my favorite ones that you can try out. So Dungeons and Dragons, what it does really well is kind of sword and sorcery pulp fantasy. There's high magic. Most character classes will have spells or magic or just access to magic weapons. And so there's a lot of kind of big, exciting combat that's able to happen. And there's tons of monsters. There's an immense amount of support, especially digitally through stuff like D&D Beyond. So it has that kind of, going through a dungeon or a jungle or a castle and fighting the monsters and getting treasure. And if that's what you're looking for, Dungeons and Dragons is marvelous. But consider some of these others. One of my very favorite role-playing games of all time, and one that I'm constantly surprised more people don't know about, is called King Arthur Pendragon. And there is a 6th edition of Pendragon coming out later this year. But right now, the earlier editions, the current one is 5.2. They're marvelous. Pendragon is, as you would expect by the name, it is based on Arthurian fantasy. That doesn't have a bunch of different character classes like fighter and thief and wizard and so on. The one and only character class is knight. And you play as a group of knights. And there are 2 reasons that I love this game the most. There's like 1,000 reasons that I love it. But the 2 that I recommend to people are, first of all, rather than having the kind of physical scores like con and dex and strength and charisma and all of those, what you have instead are a set of traits. And the traits are paired against each other. So for example, and they will always add up to 20. So for example, you could have merciful and cruel, and one is at 12 and the other one is at 8. And then you would have just and arbitrary. You can have temperate and indulgent. You can have proud and modest. And they're built in these pairs like this. So you, at a glance, looking at the character sheet, can see, oh, this gives me a good sense of what kind of personality I would have, what values my character has as a person. And then as you go through the world, sometimes the game master will ask you, okay, what do you do in this case? You're a knight and somebody offends you. Well, make a pride roll. And if you are too proud, you might have to defend yourself, even when it is, an unwise action. Or maybe your modesty is so high that you are able to, avoid that kind of thing. So you don't let your pride get in the way of you. The fact that those kind of personality traits are much more important than the physical ones is fascinating to me. And it makes for a very interesting, very cool play experience that I highly recommend. The other reason I love Pendragon is because rather than being very kind of granular, D&D, you roll the dice for every time you swing the sword. It's kind of balanced so that you have multiple fights per day as you work room by room through a dungeon and things like that. Pendragon is a little more abstract. Sometimes you will do an entire battle with just 3 or 4 rolls, and time passes. Every adventure that you play, every time you get together with your friends, that's 1 year of game time. And at the end of that, your character grows. Your character gets older. Your character, maybe you have a manor or an estate that you need to take care of. Maybe you get married and you have children. And if you play the full Pendragon campaign, which is 80 years long, you will play as a knight, and then eventually you will die in battle, or you will get old and you will have to retire, and then you can play as one of your children. And then eventually that person will get old and retire, and you can play as one of their children. It has this very long, epic, generational feel to it that is really fun and really unique, completely different kind of experience. And that's why I'm recommending it, is so that you can try these other things that are very different. Now, another game that I want to recommend, if you haven't tried it before, there's one called Blades in the Dark. This came out a few years ago and it won 1,000 awards for game design. The idea of Blades in the Dark is that it's kind of like a haunted industrial city where there's a little bit of magic, but mostly it's just monsters. There's ghosts, that live all in the wasteland around the city, and they've set up a barrier to protect the people inside. And inside, it's kind of a early industrial London, but full of different ghosts and kind of funky mad scientist technology and things like that. And the players all play as a gang of criminals. Maybe you're thieves, or maybe you're smugglers, or maybe you're revolutionaries, or whatever. And it's very player driven and very what we call narrative, meaning that the players get to decide what they want to do and say, well, we're a little gang of smugglers. We want to earn some money. So then you can go out and do, smuggling jobs. And the dice mechanic is very simple. You don't roll any dice for the bad guys. The characters will roll dice for themselves. They say, well, I want to fight this guy. And then you roll your own dice. And if you roll really well, you beat him. And if you roll really poorly, he beats you. And if you roll somewhere in the middle, you win, but with a complication. Maybe you got injured, or maybe you won, but you attracted attention and now the police are after you, something like that. It plays very quickly. It plays very easily. And it gives the players a ton of narrative freedom to tell their story and kind of guide their little gang of criminals however they would like to go. Maybe they want to bring down the corrupt magistrates that run the city, or maybe they want to become the most powerful smuggling operation in town. Maybe they just want to kind of take over more turf so that they can control a larger portion of the city and drive these other kind of violent gangs away. The dice mechanic is wonderful, and the player control is really fantastic. It can be a little difficult for some players to get their heads around because they're so accustomed to the D&D style of game where the game master tells you what's going on and you react to it. In Blades in the Dark, the players get to say what's going on, and then the game master reacts to that and talks about how the world responds to you rather than the other way around. So anyway, I could go on, and there's probably 5 or 6 more games that I would love to recommend to people, but I have seen some questions popping up in the chat. So let me get to those here.
Do you want me to read those off for you? Give you a little break?
I found them. Let's start. Someone is saying, I'm running Kids on Bikes campaign at the moment. Kids on Bikes is a really cool game that is most easily described as Stranger Things. It's, kind of kids in the 80s tooling around, trying to solve things. That idea of like Stranger Things or E.T. We are all 12 years old and some kind of funky science fiction monster or bad guy or technology has shown up and we need to deal with it. There's a very similar game from Sweden called Tales from the Loop that also has that same kind of vibe to it. Very different in feel from Kids on Bikes, but they're both a lot of fun. One of the things I love about Tales from the Loop, for example, is instead of having damage, there are just conditions. And when something bad happens to you, you will be exhausted or scared or, something like that. I can't remember what they all are. And the damage you take then is narrative rather than numerical. I am now scared, and that makes it harder for me to do all the things that I need to do to solve the problem. And the way you heal from damage in Tales from the Loop, rather than just, drinking healing potions or whatever you do in D&D, is that every character will have like a personal touchstone character. And maybe it's your best friend or your father or your grandmother or your teacher at school, somebody that you trust and love. And you have to go and do a scene with them. So if you're scared and you need to get rid of that condition, well, then you need to go and talk to your teacher at school, who's your touchstone. And you role play a little scene with them where you talk through the thing that you're afraid of. And it absolutely wonderful storytelling mechanic, the way that game handles damage. So Kids on Bikes, Tales from the Loop, both great games you should try. Can you elaborate? Here's another question. Can you elaborate on the sneaky thief character type? Show how you would develop that character. Well, it depends on exactly what you want to do with the character, right? The first time that I did a role-playing game with my own kids, I tried when they were little, but then when they were like in junior high and they were ready for kind of more advanced ideas and trickier game rules. I ran a game with my two oldest children and their cousin. And I think they were 13, 14, and 14 at the time. I think. I don't remember exactly. But two of them wanted to play sneaky thieves. And they both wanted to be really powerful fighters. And they also wanted to not ever talk to anybody. They wanted to be this kind of loner type character who was entirely self-sufficient and who didn't have to care about anybody else. And that's something that you can see in a lot of stories, right? To some extent, that's Han Solo. He is a loner. He is self-sufficient. The difference is that Han Solo does talk to people. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any truly loner characters, but maybe a good example would be Hawkeye in his first appearance in the first Thor movie. Hawkeye was completely taciturn, very non-communicative, and I mean, not exactly a thief, but definitely the sneaky, hide from people rogue archetype. This can be very difficult to work in a role-playing group, because if somebody's character is primarily defined as not relying on other people and doesn't want to talk to other people, that can make it very difficult for the game group to do anything and for you as the game master to help involve them in the story. Especially when I did this with my kids and their cousin, when two of the characters were like that. And it was basically one character trying to do everything while the other two sat back and kind of made snide remarks about him, which was funny, in hindsight, but at the time was frustrating. So how would you develop a sneaky thief character who does participate? First of all, if somebody wants to play a thief, then the number one thing, and I said this before, is you need to make sure to give them opportunities to steal stuff. Maybe they want to be a pickpocket, or maybe they want to be a cat burglar who sneaks in and takes things. Maybe they want to play something much more elaborate, like a heist, an Ocean's 11 style story, where they concoct an elaborate plan. Those can be very hard to run, but find out what kind of thief they want to be and the hero fantasy specifically that they are looking for. Do they want to be virtually invisible and can sneak in anywhere, pick any lock, get past any security system? Or do they want to be, some different kind of thief who's more of a con artist who can talk people and distract them while picking their pocket out the other side? Figure out what it is that excites them about the thief. Then, how would you develop that as a character? There's a lot of different ways to go. The number one suggestion, of course, is to look at famous thieves in literature and media. If you want to be Lupin, who steals things but is a big, flashy, showy character. Lupin is from an anime called The Castle of Cagliostro. I actually haven't seen the live action thing on Netflix. I don't know if it's related or not. Figure out what to do. Maybe the thief has stolen something that is much more powerful and much more dangerous than they realized. And now they're stuck with it and everyone's chasing them. That story could be very interesting and a little desperate. They're kind of constantly on the run, trying to unload this thing before it gets them killed. Or maybe the thief character is, has a dream that they want to go and steal a particular amazing thing. Maybe just because it's valuable, or maybe because they know that it can improve the world or that it can save somebody. They want to steal medicine, or they want to steal, a magical artifact that can help people. That's kind of the opposite of Frodo, right? Rather than take this ring to the Mount Doom and throw it in, I want to sneak into the enemy castle and steal a ring and bring it back out, and that will restore life or vitality to the world or something like that. There's a lot of different ways you can work thievery into a story, whether that is, the character isn't even necessarily a bad person. Maybe they're a Robin Hood type who is stealing from the rich to give it to the poor, or they're stealing from the evil villain so that they can defeat the evil villain. Figure out that sort of thing and work out what those thieves' motivations are. So figure out the hero fantasy, figure out, what they are motivated by, and then maybe a specific thing they want to steal or have already stolen, and you can build a story around that. There's a lot of different ideas. Let's look at some more of these questions. Any tips or pitfalls to be aware of for a new DM? Absolutely. One of the problems that a brand new dungeon master can have, let's see. First of all, cheat. Okay. For a brand new dungeon master, and there are people who will disagree with me, but here's my advice. For a brand new dungeon master, if you don't know the rules well, or you have never run a game before, it can be very easy for the players to kind of trample over you and railroad you and say, well, look, you rolled so low, that means that I beat him. That means that I have defeated the bad guy, or that I have picked the lock that you didn't think I could pick, or the game is easier or something than you had hoped it would be as a game master, because you don't yet know how to kind of calibrate the challenge level of the game you're trying to tell. So cheat. Roll all your dice behind a screen, and if you don't want someone to succeed at something, say, no, you didn't succeed at that. Don't abuse this power, but use this cheating ability to kind of cover for your own mistakes as you are learning the game. If you're just cheating to make things hard on the players for no reason, just because you're being mean to them, well, that's not what I'm talking about. But that can be a big one. Number two, let your players know that you are learning as you go. And if something happens that didn't work for everybody, feel free to retcon that. Retcon is a word that means retroactive continuity. That thing that happened didn't actually happen. We're going to go back and do it a different way. This is an important thing for a lot of groups to establish up front and say, you know what? I'm doing my best here, but you've got to work with me if I make a mistake. So if I say that something is there when it really isn't, or if I allow you to kill a villain who isn't supposed to die yet because he's supposed to show up later in the story, you got to work with me here. Now, along those same lines, piece of advice that I give to every dungeon master, whether you are brand new or you've been doing this for decades, is establish some safety rules at the table before you start. Your goal, like I said, is to tell a good story and have fun with your friends, and everyone is on the same team. And if there is something that makes one of your players uncomfortable, then you should avoid that thing. And so I use what's called the remote control. And I set this up at the beginning of every campaign, and then regular reminders. At any time, a player can shout stop or pause or rewind. Stop means no, that thing just happened and I am uncomfortable with it. There could be something that shows up in the game like racism or sexual violence or torture that maybe one player is totally fine with having torture in their game, and another player is like, nope, I don't want that. I saw this in a game store once where someone was running Dungeons and Dragons, and the villain had captured the people and was using various threats. You give us what we want, or I am going to rape you. And immediately the players were like, nope, that's not going to be a part of our game. There are game groups and there are story styles where maybe they do want that to be part of their game, but only if everyone at the table is comfortable with it, and only if everyone agrees going in that you are going to treat it maturely. So please allow, use those things. Stop means, nope, that thing didn't happen. We need to do something else. Pause means, I'm kind of uncomfortable with this, but let's talk about it. And rewind means, nope, we need to do that a different way. And again, this could be something like torture. Torture is one that comes up a lot. You've captured somebody, you're trying to interrogate them. They're not giving you the information you want. And one of the players will say, well, I'm going to cut one of his fingers off. at which point maybe your group is okay with that, or maybe they're not. And someone can say, nope, rewind. He didn't actually say that. We're not going to have finger cutting off and torturing and disfiguring in our game. We're going to do this a different way. Establishing safety rules beforehand is absolutely vital. And I'm not saying this because I want to ruin your fun. If you and all your friends are totally fine with cutting off fingers in your game, then great, cut off fingers in your game. This is where I've just lost all the parents that I talked to at the beginning. But if anyone at the table is made uncomfortable by that, then you should change it. Hands down, no question. Because your goal is not to tell a story where we're allowed to cut fingers off. Your goal is to tell a story with your friends that makes everyone comfortable, that makes everyone happy, that helps everyone have fun. And your friends should be more important than the story that you are telling. So please establish some good safety rules beforehand and make sure that people know, what is okay, what is not okay, and have some tools in place to change them, to fix problems if they arise in the middle of the game. I have had groups that I have played with for years, friends that I have known for decades. Even in that situation, we will still sometimes have things crop up where one person does something that makes somebody else uncomfortable. So safety tools, super vital. All right. Someone asked, what are some tips on quickly making interesting NPCs the players will enjoy? This is a long, long topic that we could talk about for a very long time, and we are running quickly out of time. So let me just give the very short one. Cast them as somebody. Okay. When they meet an NPC, think in your head, okay, well, this NPC is played by Tom Hiddleston or Peter Falk or Helen Mirren or, whoever it is. Cast them as a recognizable person. This shopkeeper is actually Cruella de Vil. Don't say that out loud, but that in your head gives you an idea of, oh, I know how to play this person. I know what kinds of things they would say. I know what kind of personality to give them. And the more you stretch the boundaries, if every investigator you come into talks like Columbo, well, then that is going to get old eventually. But, if it is the ice cream salesman who talks like Columbo, or if it is the investigator who talks like Cruella de Vil, then that is going to be a very different kind of scenario that will be a lot more interesting, a lot more memorable. So cast your NPCs as recognizable types and tropes that you can play in your head. Okay, somebody asked, what are your thoughts on the balance between preparing and outlining sessions versus thinking on your feet? It's a hard balance to figure out, and I'd love to know in your experience how much you find yourself doing of each. I tend to, when I write my books, I outline things very extensively. I know exactly what's going to happen scene by scene in the entire book before I start writing any of it. That, as implied by this question, does not work in role-playing games because you, as the creator, are not the sole creator. You're working with a group of players and they have agency. And if they don't have agency and freedom to make their own choices, well, then you're doing it wrong. It may as well just be story time and you sit them all down and tell them your story. If you want to let the players really interact with it and change things and take things in their own directions, you have to be willing to think on your feet. So what I will usually do is I will come up with a handful of set pieces, big things that I think will be interesting. Here are some villains that I would like them to encounter today. Here is a thing that they have to get out of a location. And then just let them do whatever they want. I wrote I wrote several adventures for a gaming supplement that's coming out soon called Grimmer Space, which is a horror science fiction game set in the Starfinder universe, or using the Starfinder rules. It's its own universe. But that was an interesting challenge for me because writing the scenario to go in a published book means that I can't think on my feet. I have to present all the information so that then you as game master can buy the book and think on your feet. And so I needed the players to get some information out of a police station in this planet. And so I basically just made sure to include a lot of different routes. If they wanted to talk their way in, they could do that. If they wanted to fight their way in, they could do that. If they wanted to sneak their way in, they could do that. So presenting a scenario and then letting the players play with it often works better than presenting them with a specific path or puzzle to solve. Think of this as the difference between a game and a toy. A game has very specific rules and it has a very specific win condition. But a toy is just a thing that you can play with and do anything with. And so if you as a game master are presenting your players with toys, this police station is a toy. You know who's in it, and you know what kind of computer system it has and what kind of security system it has, and kind of the basics about that. You don't have to work out exactly who everyone in the whole police station is and what their hopes and dreams are, but just present them with that toy and let them figure out how to get what they want out of it. Let them do anything that they want. A battle can be a toy. If a castle, a dungeon, any of these can be a toy. Any scenario that you put your players into, figure out kind of the basics about it, and then just let them have fun and do whatever, kind of play with that toy in any way that they want. Okay, I'm going through these questions a lot more quickly now because I'm supposed to be done in like 5 minutes. So, would you be willing to share more about your experience being a professional GM? How do you find groups who want to pay you to run a game for them? Is it something you would recommend? I would recommend it if you go in with the right expectations. I have been doing this for 1.5 years, I guess, March to March and then March to August now, which I guess is almost 1.5 years. In the first year, I did make enough money that the professional GMing paid my mortgage. It did not by itself support me or my family. And so you have to be clear about this. I run right now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 regular games. 5 of those are weekly, 1 is bi-weekly, and 1 is monthly. And I, keep a little chart right here just off camera that you can't see. And I have the rates that I charge. I charge $20 per person per hour. And you may decide to charge more or less than that. It depends on what you think your time is worth and what you think people will be willing to pay. Don't undersell yourself. If you want to actually make money doing this, then charge what you're worth. Because you don't want to be trapped in a situation where you think, well, nobody's going to play unless I only charge $5 for the whole session. And then you end up, having to run an entire session and you only get $5 out of it. And at that point, you're not really a professional game master. You're just someone who they give you pizza money and that's it. And maybe that's all you want out of it. You need to understand your own needs and your own goals as a professional game master. So number one, money-wise, think of it as supplementary income rather than replacement income. Don't quit your job and become a professional GM. There are people who do that, but most of us have another job on the side. I still write and publish books in addition to being a professional GM. Finding people can be difficult. I am a unique case in that I am already a New York Times best-selling author with a fairly public platform. I was able to get on Twitter and I was able to, get on my Twitch show and I was able to get on my podcast and say, hey, I do this. If anyone would like me to run a game, let me know. Send me an email. I have a website where people can go look up my books. And for a very long time, most of 2020, the first page on my website was, I'm a professional GM. Here's, the kind of things that I do. Here's what I charge. Hit me up. And so if you don't have that kind of a platform, it can be more difficult. Number one, you need to create a website of some kind, even if it is just an Instagram or a Twitter where someone can look you up and find information about you. That is kind of a base level operating procedure for any type of business that you want to start. People need to be able to find you online. Once you've got that, you can do advertisements over Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever. I recommend in the beginning, don't pay for those because you don't yet have any income, and Facebook ads are notoriously crappy. So they might not pay off in any way. Get onto sites like Roll20, which is a really good online virtual tabletop website. They've got a forum where you can get on and advertise the games that you are playing. And there are lots of others like Astral and Foundry and all these others. Look up virtual tabletops and you will find a dozen or so, and each with different strengths and weaknesses and different user bases. And you can use their message boards to advertise your service. You can do this on Reddit. You can do this on Discords. You can talk to your friends. You can do all that kind of stuff. Start small, get the word out there. And then as you grow, if you've got one campaign and you kind of get a good sense of how it's going to work or how you wish you'd done it better, then you can change your advertisements. You can change the places you are advertising and kind of move up from there. It is something that I enjoy doing. I think that I might be raising my rates soon. I am not doing it yet, though. So if anybody wants me to run a game for them, let me know. Just look me up, thedanwells.com. Anyway, thank you, everybody. But I'm glad that you were here. Thank you so much for listening to me and putting up with my bad voice and my occasional coughing. And have fun playing role-playing games. I will see you later.
Thank you so much, Dan. Appreciate that. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Make sure to check out our other Litfest programs this month, and make sure to check out Dan Wells' website and DM and books and everything else. Have a good night, everybody.